have my dad to thank for getting me into the snow. Unfortunately, I think I disappointed him just a little bit. When I was 12, I switched to snowboarding. I did grow up as a skier since I was 2 at Alta. But you know, twin tip skis really weren't around when I started snowboarding. And snowboarders were like jibbing rails and hanging out with the girls and like being like the cool people, you know? So I wanted to be a cool person. So I switched to snowboarding. Luckily, they invented these split boards, and now I get to hike uphill just like the skiers do on AT gear. And obviously, I'm assuming many of us in this room want to, hike uphill and then shred right back down the hill. That's kind of the whole idea of backcountry skiing and riding. Just real quick, how many people are skiers in the room? Okay, majority, split boarders. Who's with me? Awesome, okay. Who's like snowshoeing and just getting out there? Okay, quite a few of us. What about any snowmobilers? Aha, you do it all. Hand was up every time about snowboarding.
No, well, I do snowboard very seldom. A little bit of everything.
Yeah, creature of all crafts. I like it. So yeah, in the summertime, I spend a lot of time in my kayak. I really love whitewater kayaking. I also spend a lot of time thinking about like why it is that I seek out adventure a little bit. And I think a lot of you in the room are also seeking out adventure because you're interested in going in the mountains. So for me, I don't paddle flat water like this photo. I typically head for a little bit more aggressive whitewater, something like this photo. This is the North Fork of the Payette in Idaho. And I think whitewater has a lot to do with the mountains. The mountains can be complicated. Avalanches can be complicated. Much like whitewater is very complicated. You also don't just jump into a river like this, right? This took a lot of thought. I had to study the rapid. I had to understand the consequences of the rapid. I had to be honest with myself and say, could I actually paddle that whitewater? So just like the backcountry, you have to ask yourself the same questions. Like, if you're looking at a big line or a big objective or just getting out, it's like, do I understand the avalanche conditions? What are the consequences of that particular slope that I might be riding? And am I up to the task for the day? So you have to be honest with yourself, and I think kayaking for me does that. The one difference though is that with whitewater, you can see the danger. Think about it just for a second. You can see the danger. Meaning, I could look at the rapid, and I could look and see a log in the water, or what we call a sieve, which is where two rocks pile up and you can get stuck in between them and drown. In the mountains, it's different. Like, you can't see the avalanches, right? Everything just looks white. It's probably a sunny day. It's beautiful. We're feeling good about things, but you can't see the avalanches. It's like it turns on a switch when that avalanche fractures and everything changes. Unlike whitewater, you kind of see it, it's a little bit more constant. So I spend a lot of time thinking about these different connections. I also love mathematics. If anybody's a math geek, please feel free to come talk to me. Thank you guys for coming in and joining us. I'm a mechanical engineer master's student up at the university, so I spend a lot of time looking at garbage like this. Partial differential equations, I find them also very cool. And then rock climbing. I'm a rock climber. Again, I think rock climbing is a lot like the mountains as well. You really have to think about what you're doing and think about the consequences of each move. And maybe that's why I'm attracted to these kind of sports. But more importantly, I love my job. I get to go out in the mountains and wear funny colored hats and point at weak layers and take photos. I'm usually not late to talks. I'll be honest with you. This is 8 years for me doing Know Before You Go presentations, and this is my first one. So again, my deepest apologies, and I hope that comes out well. And I appreciate everybody sticking around. But yeah, I love getting out in the snow and looking at the snow. I love avalanches. I think they're fascinating, right? Like, You look at something like that and just the power, it's like the awe. If you've ever been to the ocean and just seen it rage, it's kind of hard not to stand there and just have your mouth open like, holy crap, look at the power. And that's kind of what avalanches are for me. I love standing next to these crown lines. I love thinking about, why did this avalanche happen, right? Like, what was the wind direction? What was the weak layer? Like, who triggered it? Where did they trigger it? What aspect, what elevation? There's a ton of questions that can be answered when we're looking at avalanches. So I find them very fascinating. Some can be really large. That's Craig Gordon, my old partner out in the Uintas. That thing was like 18 feet tall. It was pretty impressive. You know, they can have two different layers, as you can see here. There's kind of two different layers there, and there's the bed surface. They can connect through rock bands. So I find all these avalanches really just pretty fascinating. You can see one came down from over here. You can see all the debris there in the photo. Avalanches haven't always been super friendly to my family. My dad is one of my great backcountry partners, and him and his friends actually in 2004 were caught in an avalanche on Kessler Peak. Does anybody know where that is? Big Cottonwood. Does everybody know where Donut Falls is? Cool. Right behind Donut Falls, you'll see a big giant pointing peak. That's Kessler. There's an avalanche path called God's Lawnmower, aptly named. It's a very large avalanche path. They were hiking up through some trees, and again, on some pretty low angle terrain, but what they didn't know is the slope got just a little bit steeper above them, and they triggered an avalanche that came down on top of them. My dad's two partners only moved about 50 vertical feet in the avalanche, and one gentleman broke 5 ribs, punctured a lung. The other guy tore out his knee every which way you could think about. So they weren't moving, and my dad was gone. He went for the longest ride through thick pine trees. He was buried about waist deep, face down in the snow, and we think he was unconscious for about 20 minutes. And this is what he looked like the night he came home from the hospital. So, pretty banged up. A couple of his injuries were, you know, as you can see, he has a giant cut on his forehead that goes about to the back of, you know, the middle of his head. Huge contusion on the side of his face there. He broke 4 or 5 fingers, dislocated a shoulder, and then right here on his neck, you can see that dark spot. That was where a tree branch tried to stab him into the neck. So I feel very fortunate that he made it through this, because a lot of people do not. And I'm grateful to say that we still ride and ski together today, and he still has a love for the snow, but it was a very close call, very close to home for me that day with my dad. How many people in the room, and sorry to exclude some snowshoers here, but snowbird, if I just said we're gonna go right up Hidden Peak, up the tram to the top of Hidden Peak, and we're gonna snowboard or ski back to the bottom, who would join me in that adventure in the room? Okay, not as many as I hoped. It's okay. Perfect. Well, you'd feel pretty confident in getting down from Hidden Peak. You know, a lot of us are very capable skiers and riders. But then if I ask the same question, how many of us, if I just took a helicopter ride to the top of Lone Peak, and I wanted us to ride the northeast couloir off of Lone Peak, which is about a 2,000-foot run, 40 degrees with a cliff band in the middle, how many of us feel really confident about assessing the avalanche conditions and riding that line safely? Would anybody raise their hand now?
I would trust you to go with, but not going to do it without you.
Awesome. So if I was there, you'd rock and roll. I like it. Yeah, so the purpose of this slide is just to get you to realize that a lot of us have really good riding and skiing abilities. But where are our avalanche skills in terms of our riding skills? We see a lot of accidents happen because people are really good riders and skiers and boarders and sledders, but they don't have a ton of avalanche knowledge. And that's what gets them in trouble in the backcountry. In a ski resort, you can kind of go big all the time because snow safety's there to help knock down the avalanches. So that's really all that slide's saying. The other thing is the only source of knowledge is experience. And I believe that for mindset. And let me tell you why I think that's true. It's because you could come to many of these Know Before You Go talks. You could read all the books you want on avalanches, thesis papers, the whole deal, movies, everything. But really, until you flop your boards down on the snow or in your snowshoes, you don't have any experience. And experience in the mountain goes a long way, especially with the science that isn't necessarily perfect. So I would encourage anybody in the room that is starting to kind of get out, get after it a little bit more, look for somebody with experience. And by experience, I don't mean 3 or 5 years of experience. I mean, find somebody that has 10 plus years of backcountry experience and cling on to them. Because if they've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years and they're still alive, they're making good choices, all right? And those are people you want to learn from, are the people that have some experience. So I would encourage you to find somebody with some experience if you are starting to venture out into the backcountry a little bit more. You know, luckily for us, most avalanches are going to happen on a day like this one. You know, much like this past weekend, it was windy, it was blowing snow. I mean, I was out on Sunday and it was pretty miserable, right? It's just nuking snow, sideways wind. It's really not even that fun of a day to be in the mountains. But what we see is that most avalanche accidents happen on days like this one. First sunny day right after a powder storm. And I mean, I get it, right? I'm one of you. I love the powder just as much as the next person. And we live in this beautiful amazing place where we have a huge population of skiers. I mean, you can totally see it, you know? If it's a Saturday and it's sunny after a powder storm, just trying to get to the resorts can be kind of a nightmare. You know, you try to get into 7-Eleven for a taquito, and it's like, man, it's really hard to do this. So that's where we see most avalanche accidents, is right after the first sunny day, right after a storm. Because that stoke is high, and the sun makes us feel good, and what can go wrong on a sunny day with our best friends? And this is what a lot of the resorts are starting to look like, you know? I mean, they open up a backcountry gate, and it's just people are fleeting out into the backcountry because you got to get your Instagram snap and post how good the day was. And, you know, but more importantly, it doesn't matter how you get to the backcountry, whether you're hiking on skins, snowmobiling, snowshoeing, it doesn't matter. The crazy thing about Utah, and again, because of this population and this dense area we live in, you're going to come across slopes, and I don't care what the danger rating is for the day, you're going to come across slopes and you're going to see tracks. Okay? You're going to see tracks. You might be snowmobiling, and just like this guy, you're seeing some tracks. You can even see old tracks in this photo. But I'm here to tell you, especially in Utah, where we deal with persistent weak layers, and I'll explain what this means in a few minutes, tracks don't mean a thing, right? All it takes is this slope is completely tracked out. All it takes is this snowmobiler goes a little bit higher. He finds a spot, or she finds a spot where the snowpack's a little bit thinner, and boom, they can trigger the avalanche. So that's really important. Tracks on a slope don't mean a thing when we're dealing with persistent weak layers. And I'll explain that right now. So this is what a slab avalanche looks like. This is my partner and I, Craig, in the Western Uintas. You can see I'm stomping along this ridgeline right here, and in 1 second, you're gonna see the avalanche trigger, boom. You can see the shooting cracks go out, and then the slab of snow is what we call right here, that's the slab. A slab is basically just a cohesive plate of snow that starts to move down the mountain as a unit. Now, as it moves fast enough, it breaks up and it creates that classic powder cloud, as many of us think of what avalanches are in our minds, or in especially Hollywood, right? So the weak layer was right here. That weak layer is what we call faceted snow. Faceted snow is just this angular, grainy snow. And again, I'll explain more about this in a minute. But This is the type of avalanche that kills most backcountry users, slabs, right? And the reason why is because they allow us to get in the slope, and then all of a sudden they break around us, and we really don't have a great escape. This guy got super lucky. You can see that. He was able to get off the moving piece of snow and out of harm's way. However, many of us are not that lucky, right? These blocks of snow grab our skis or our board or our sled, and it sucks you down, and then you're at the mercy of the avalanche. There's really no way to get out of the thing. And it's no wonder that about 1/4 of the people that get caught in avalanches die from trauma. Right? Imagine yourself moving 40 or 50 miles an hour down the slope. You hit rocks and trees on your way down. It doesn't matter if you're buried. 1 out of 4 people dead before the avalanche stops. It's a pretty gruesome statistic. And you know, it took a while for me to realize this, but it doesn't take a swath of trees. You know, I used to think like, oh, my runout has to be this swath of trees to kill me. It takes 1 tree. Any mountain bikers in the room? Awesome. Could you imagine ripping down single track at 50 and just hitting that aspen tree on the corner with your head? I mean, it's like lights out, you know? 40, 50 miles an hour, it takes 1 tree, not a swath. So this is why avalanches are very dangerous. I've never been caught in an avalanche, but I can only imagine it's just like being in a washing machine or in the ocean. I am a surfer a little bit. I pretty much drowned most of the time I go surfing. But, you know, it's like getting washed in a wave. You really don't know which way is up or down. Snow goes down your pants, it goes up your coat, your gloves get ripped off, beanie's gone. You go to take a breath and all you do is inhale snow. And then it's like this thing just stops, and it's not like you pop out of it and start high-fiving all your buddies like, that was sick. You know, you're cemented in place. Like, you can't get out of this debris. So now it's up to your partners to come down the hill. They've got to find you with a beacon, right? So we have our beacons on, hopefully. They find us with a beacon. They've got to use a probe. And then the hardest part of all is they've got to dig me out of this avalanche. One thing about beacons, it's really cool. I mean, you can just go grab any beacon that REI sells right now, pick it up, and they're so simple, right? Like, the numbers go down, the beeps get louder, and you line the arrow up straight. They're really pretty simple these days. In fact, I gave one to like my 4-year-old nephew the other night. I just said, hey man, like, make the number go down and the beeps get louder, and he found the beacon in the house in like a minute. So they're very simple. What we're learning with avalanche accidents is it's not necessarily the beacon search and the probing that goes bad, it's the shovel. Like, think about if you have to dig a 5-foot deep hole about the size of a hot tub to get somebody in dense avalanche debris, how long do you think it'll take you? My bet is at least 10 to 15, 20 minutes if you're alone, and then maybe that goes down a little bit more with partners. So how much time do we have? Because once you're buried under the snow, the clock's ticking. You've only got a limited amount of time to live now. So if we look at statistics, if my partners are really solid, like in the Matt and Tom video, by the way, he was 8 feet deep, buried up against that tree. They got to him in 8 minutes, which is pretty fast, as you'll see with the statistic. He was completely blue, like it said in the video. They gave him 1 breath and he came to, but it was like super close. An 8-foot burial, especially next to a tree. It was a really remarkable rescue. It was pretty fantastic how they pulled that off. But let's say you were like Matt and Tom and you got to somebody within about 15 minutes, you've got a 70% chance to live. You know, in Vegas, that sounds great, right? Like, oh, 70% chance on my money, let's throw down. When it comes to my life, it's like, whoa, 30%, that's kind of, that's a lot. And remember, this is after 1/4 of us are already killed. So the statistics are pretty brutal with avalanches, right? 1 out of 4 people die, are buried and still alive. You've only got a 70% chance to be alive in 15 minutes. And then if we drag it out to say somewhere about 30 minutes, your chances of living are now 20%. And that's a huge drop, right? You can see just the graph just basically plummets. Does anybody have an idea why that might be? Suffocation, I like it. Our technical term would be asphyxiation under the snow, but why do you think you'd suffocate under the snow? Yeah?
Is it because you're breathing your own breath?
Yeah, perfect. You're breathing your own breath. You're breathing your own carbon dioxide. But even more important, what happens is there's actually a lot of air in the snow. But what happens is you breathe in and out, your breath is warm, and it melts the snow around your face. And then because the snow is very cold, it freezes, and then it forms what we call an ice mask. So it's just like breathing into a plastic bag. And right at about 9, 10, 15 minutes, we pass out, and then if we don't get our air, we die. So that's the truth and the reality of being buried in the snow. There have been a few miraculously live recoveries after a long time. I think one just happened in like the Alps like 3 weeks ago or a month. Somebody was buried for like a few hours and they got out. Chances are that's somebody who has a pretty good air pocket in the snow. But there are some that go out later than that. So the bottom line, you're gonna go in the backcountry, transceiver, probe, shovel. You have to have all of this equipment because without it, you're never gonna find your partner buried in the snow. Like a transceiver leads to a probe leads to a shovel leads to your partner. So those three things are essential to carry in the mountains if you're going. Avalanche airbags are really cool. These are kind of new, 5-6 years now they've been out on the market. They're relatively easy to figure out. You pull a ripcord, poof, airbag comes out of the pack. It's basically the same concept, like if you don't believe how these things work, go home to your pantry, grab a can of mixed nuts, give the mixed nuts a shake for a while. What do you think happens to your can of mixed nuts? Anybody? Say again. What settles? Which kind of nuts settle? So the small nuts go to the bottom, big nuts rise to the top. So just like in an avalanche, you're increasing your volume with an airbag, and as you're tumbled down the mountain, you actually rise to the surface of the snow, which is really good because if I'm not buried, I can breathe. But the downfall to airbags is that they don't save us from trauma. That's something like a lot of people think, oh, I'm just gonna buy an airbag, I'm gonna be solid. But remember, hitting trees, rocks, cliffs, being buried into gullies, these things don't save us. So they do work very well. The statistics on these things are amazing, and I personally wear one. So I believe in the airbags. The other tool is an avalung. Avalungs are also great for increasing your odds if you're caught in an avalanche. You basically have to stick that tube in your mouth, and what it does is there's a little burp valve in there that exits the carbon dioxide down by your butt in a little vent in the backpack. So you can breathe in air, exit carbon dioxide down low. Black Diamond, who's the inventor of the avalung, recommends that you, like in your ski run or you're about to ride, you're gonna stick this tube in your mouth. Bruce Tremper, being the brilliant guy he was and former boss of the Avalanche Center, said, wait a second. So I'm about to ski or run, and the last thing I'm gonna do is stick a tube in my mouth because I'm worried about getting caught in an avalanche. He's like, maybe I should ski something different. So I agree with Bruce. It's a great tool. Again, you've got to get this thing in your mouth. That's the only way it works. I think the poor soul at Black Diamond that had to test this thing was under the snow for like almost 2 hours, and he started becoming hypothermic before they were worried about him running out of oxygen. So they work very well if this tube is in your mouth. But we have to practice. Beacon, shovel, probe, we need to practice because we've got to have the skills to get people out of the snow quickly, because like I said, you've got that 15 minutes. It's a small window. So we have to practice. Luckily in Utah, we have these beacon basins. This one's actually out of the Uintas at Noblets. But we have Solitude, Brighton, Snowbird, Snow Basin, Park City, Mountain Resort, all have these, and they're completely free to us. So basically, minus your lift ticket, of course, right? Because let's see, Park City Mountain, you need a lift ticket, but Brighton, you need a lift ticket, Solitude, you do not, and Snowbird, you do not. And then any of our snowmobile trailheads, most of them have these, and you don't need to pay anything, they're just free. What they are is a little beacon box, and there's beacons already buried out in the field. So you roll up to it, you push like, do I want to find 1 or 2 beacons? Turn it on, you run around with your beacon and your probe, you strike a plate, a little siren goes off and it times you. So it's really cool, it's a great way to learn about your avalanche transceiver and get great practice really quick with them. So it's a great thing for us to utilize here in Utah.
Is it hard to find at Noblets? I'm going there next week, you know,
It's not hard to find at Noblet, so that's the parking lot. The parking lot would be like right here. Does that make sense? So it's at the very end of the parking lot. I am not 100% sure if Craig has installed this yet. It takes 30 inches of snow or so there, and it takes a little bit of depth for them to get it in. So I'm not 100% sure if it's at Noblet's just now. But if it is, you'll see this orange fencing, and it'll be pretty obvious. And usually they have a sign that says Beacon Park. Without this gear, it'd be like finding your buddy in this thing. You're never gonna find them. It'd be a needle in a haystack kind of a operation. Chances are they're gonna come out in the springtime when it thaws, because we don't have a way to find you.
Unless you got the Rico equipment
Perfect, yeah.
for finding dead people?
Yep. So Reco is another tool, which I have a slide here in a second about Reco. But Reco is implanted in your ski clothing or your boots or your helmet. Basically, it's a reflector. So somebody, search and rescue, like these guys here, would like wave this thing around and it sends a signal, and if it reflects back off of your reflector to their signal reader, it makes a beep and they can find you. Reco is a great tool, as a matter of fact. It's had a few live recoveries in the Alps. Here, not so much. They don't have to use it all that often, but Reco is another tool. It does not replace an avalanche transceiver. Because by the time these hardworking men and women show up on avalanche scenes, it's about 45 minutes to an hour before you see organized rescue. So the only way somebody comes out of the snow is companion rescue. So it's up to you and your partner to dig people out of the snow. So you can't totally rely on snow safety. These hardworking people, they will come and help us. But you gotta remember, if you're at say Brighton and you go out of the rope line, and even if you can see the ski area, right? You get caught in an avalanche, they will come and help. Just remember, they have a lot of protocols to go through for coming and helping you, right? They've got to determine their own safety, they've got a chain of command, they've got people. It's a process, so it takes a lot of time for them to get out there. They will come and help, they will come and assist, but time, again, is the big thing. So usually when they do show up, it's pretty sad. By the time search and rescue, snow safety comes up, if somebody's still in the snow, it's usually a pretty bad outcome. You might think, well, I've got the Powder Bird's phone number stored in my phone, and if I get caught in an avalanche, I'll just call in the choppers, just like in Hollywood. It's sort of true. There's, I think, 4 helicopters that will come and help us in the mountains. It's pretty incredible. We've got Life Flight, we've got Air Med, DPS, and Wasatch Backcountry Rescue. They all have different ships. They're all available to come and help you. One thing about helicopters is they can't fly in weather like this. They crash in weather like that. So it's also another important consideration of how far do we go on a storm day? How far away am I from outside help? Because if you're way out in the mountains and you need a helicopter, it doesn't fly on days like those. So helicopters are a great resource to us. Again, I think the average time in the Salt Lake Mountains is 45 minutes for rescuers to show up in an avalanche accident. That's whether you're outside a ski area boundary or you're deep in the backcountry and you're waiting for the helicopter. It's about 45 minutes average. And that's pretty fast. I've heard of some people in like southeast Idaho that waited like 3, 4, 5 hours by the time the helicopter got there. So the Wasatch is pretty quick, but again, it's about 45 minutes. So I like this statistic a lot. This says 90% of all avalanche accidents are triggered by the victim or somebody in the victim's group. The reason why I like this statistic is it tells me that I'm not driving up Little Cottonwood Canyon in my car and some rogue avalanche comes down and just buries me in the creek and I'm smoked. You know, Hollywood would make us believe this, right? Like the Jeep commercials, the avalanche. I love that thing. As the avalanche is chasing the Jeep down the road. This tells me that it's my choices. Right? I decided to go up White Pine. I decided to drop in that 38-degree slope. And I was the person that triggered the avalanche, and I was the one caught, and I was the one killed. So it puts the blame back on us. It's our own decisions in the mountains that are getting us into trouble. It's not these random events that just occur and people are dying because of it. In 90%, it's almost always the victim that triggers the slide. So what do you think? Did I trigger an avalanche here? No? Yeah, I don't think so. Looks like bad skiing. Does anybody know where that is? I ask it every time, nobody can tell me. It's gotta be back east, huh?
I thought it was just a powder day along the Wasatch now.
Yeah, it's starting to be what it looks like, huh? And you know, most avalanches happen in the backcountry. In fact, almost all avalanches happen in the backcountry. And the reason why that is if you head to one of our world-class ski resorts, you have really hard-working men and women that get up every morning and they shoot artillery at the mountain, or they throw hand charges and they bring down the avalanches before we ever get there at the ski areas. So these people make the ski areas very safe because they knock down all the snow before we show up. That's why I like going to Alta is very, very safe, whereas going into Catherine's Pass, you've got to have a totally different mindset. Like, that's backcountry, you just are in a ski area. Totally two different things. One's controlled, one's uncontrolled. So let's talk a little bit about some avalanche terrain. I always like these REI talks because I think a lot of people want to come here and learn. So I include this slide. This is more of a level 1 concept if you take a formal avalanche class. It's basically called the avalanche triangle. But I really like it because it makes a couple great points. One is, does anybody really care about some avalanche in like remote Alaska that like nobody sees, hears, or finds out? I sure don't care about it, you know. But when you add people with weather, snowpack, and terrain, you get the avalanche triangle, and all of a sudden it becomes pretty important. And then if you add buildings and roads and infrastructure, it becomes even more important, because if we have avalanches taking out condos or houses and killing people, that's just unacceptable. So really, I think it's a great tool for us to think about for a second. And what do you think? Do you think I can control the weather? I mean, I work at the National Weather Service Center. I've been looking for that dial, you know, the snow dial. I can't seem to find it down there. Yeah, no, I mean, it would be snowing every single day, just a couple inches, of course, if I could control the weather. What about the snowpack? Can I control the snowpack? Like, do I have a special snowpack power? No. I would say that's a little bit of a trick question, because you can control the snowpack just a little bit. And think about it for a second. Let's say Utah has a high avalanche danger for a very unstable snowpack. But Jackson Hole has a green avalanche danger for a very stable snowpack. I could very easily make the choice to drive from Utah to Jackson, and I could choose my snowpack a little bit. So I can a little bit chew snow. I can't erase what's in our mountains right now, like some of the wheat layers we have currently. I wish I could. What about terrain? Do you think I can fully control my terrain? You can choose where you go. Love it. Can we say I can 100% control my terrain every single day of the year? I disagree, yes. Think about it. I could make the decision this Saturday to go to Fashion Place Mall. Do you think I'll find an avalanche? No. I could make the choice to, walk around Midway in flat terrain away from all avalanche slopes. Or I could make the decision to go to the northeast face of Lone Peak, which is 40-degree, very steep and rugged avalanche terrain. So yes, you have full control over terrain, which is why I think it's the most important thing for you and I to learn about. Because the snowpack, it can be a mystery. I mean, there's people getting PhD degrees in snow and avalanche science. I mean, there's thesis papers, and it's a science. I mean, it's very, very complicated. So if it can even mystify the experts, maybe I should turn my focus to terrain, because that's where I have full control. And that's how I use the mountains. I use terrain. So tell me a little bit, why do you, I want to hear your feedback. Why do you think terrain is so important? What is it about terrain that would make it important to understand? Yeah?
I know the slope makes a big difference. The
Perfect.
Degree or angle, whatever.
The slope angle makes a big difference, and it does, you're right. Absolutely. So the slope angle makes a big difference in whether things avalanche. What else about terrain?
Facing the sun.
Ah, perfect, so aspect. So does it face north or south, east or west, or anywhere in between? Perfect, yeah, sun versus shade, that's an important concept too. Trees, like for anchors, or anchors turn also into very bad consequences too. Perfect. Yeah, I think those are all really important things to consider, yeah.
No, I thought it was interesting, you said your dad was in a bunch of trees.
Yep.
And that was interesting to me. Does that mean that the avalanche blew through those trees and went to him?
It did. He was in thick, old-growth trees. They were pretty aware that it was somewhat dangerous out there. It was like 40 inches of new snow. It was great face shot powder. Third run of the day, and they were in even thicker trees, but they were tired of fighting through all the branches. So they poked out into a little less sparse trees. That's where they turned it, and it washed right through those trees. So yeah, we're going to talk about trees and how to kind of use them in a second. But I personally think that terrain is so important because I already mentioned it. We can fully control it. The problem is if you make a mistake, it could be your last day skiing. So this video to me is pretty powerful. This doesn't look like a steep slope to me. You know, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's the 5th skier on the slope. I mean, this is like where the old man likes to ski, you know? Beautiful sunny powder. But the 7th person goes down, finds a weakness, and here goes the slope. You can see the consequences. So that skier died.